What is up, everybody? Welcome to the Red and Bold Show. It's been a little while since we've been here, maybe a couple of weeks. I don't remember. I've lost count, slept some since then. But either way, we are excited to be back. I'm Marc Adams. I'm one of your hosts. You can find me at 49ers Camelot, or you can find me where I write a lot each week at 49ers Web Zone. I'm joined by my co-host, Anthony Robertson. You can find him at 49ers Cutback. How's it going, Ant?
It's going well, and everyone should follow your work on 49ers Web Zone. I follow Marc's work on 49ers Web Zone, and it's good stuff. So make sure you go check that out. He usually has weekly mailbags and all kinds of fun stuff. So go check that out. Yeah, and it's it feels like it's been a long week already, and that's really fun. But we're at Wednesday, and the 49ers have plenty of stuff that's been going on as they build for this offseason. I think it's been an interesting offseason already, even though they haven't really taken care of any of the big moves that they need to take care of. But I think this is going to be a fun episode, and I'm looking forward to our conversation.
Yeah, I think it's going to be an interesting offseason. It's going to be a really important offseason. It's going to be a very important draft. We saw last year they had a really good draft, and I think that those rookies played a critical role, and they're going to play a critical role in keeping things moving. If they could hit on another draft like they did last year, then they could position themselves, and they need it because of all the Trey Lance mess, with not that Trey Lance is a mess, but just the mess of using 3 first-round picks on him. And so they had a couple of years without a first rounder. They've missed on some second rounders. They've missed on some third rounders. They used one on a kicker that right now well, let's start there, because I don't think we haven't done a show since the end of the season, and so let's start right there with Jake Moody. You and I have defended him quite a bit, but toward the end of the season, we got to where we weren't defending him. Do you think they're going to get rid of Moody, or do you think that they're more likely to bring in competition and then see how things go from there?
I think it's going to be competition. I think that Jake Moody showed a little bit at the end of his rookie season, hitting those clutch field goals in the Super Bowl. And yes, he missed field goals in the Super Bowl as well. But when you hit 57 yards in a Super Bowl, it kind of keeps people's attention. I thought that he was having a really solid season early on. He only had the one key miss, and it was a key miss, but one miss. And then after that, kind of the wheels fell off after the injury. Was it the injury? Was it some the injury? Was it some the holder? New holder, not Mitch Wisnowski down the stretch. Did that play a part in it? I think it's enough to get him to where he has a competition during training camp and during the preseason. But I do think they're going to bring in somebody that they feel has an opportunity to beat him out. And it's not going to be Jake Moody because of his draft pick, status. It's not going to be where he was picked at. They're going to get the best possible guy, because I know Kyle Shanahan, his mannerisms and everything that he had going on during the season, he was more than frustrated with Jake Moody, and he does not want to lose football games because of a kicker. They're going to address this, and I think it's in the form of competition. And I wouldn't be surprised if Jake Moody got beat out in training camp and we had a new kicker in 2025.
I agree that it's going to be a competition, but here's why I think that Jake Moody might not get beat out. Because by all accounts, from those that are there watching practices, and you certainly have been one of those during training camp, by all accounts, he's a great practice kicker. And so I think it may come down to preseason, where they stick him in there and see what they can do. I don't know what they're going to do, because if he's missing during games, but he's not missing during practices, then but again, maybe it did have to do with the injury. Both kickers that they brought in to replace him this year performed better than he did, but you never know. I mean, it very well could be. And I would say the 49ers probably know if it was injury related or not. So let's hope that was the case, and that if he wins that competition, that he'll be in the right frame of mind in 2025.
Yeah, I love this from David Campbell. Jake's kicking makes Shanahan moody, which is well played. And what's up to everyone in chat? What's up, Josh? What's up, David? And you know what? It could be. And you're right about him being so good at practice. And you know what he doesn't face at practice? Pressure. There's no pressure to make those kicks at practice. And I think that when we see him in the games, there is a pressure. And I think everyone who's watched Jake Moody kick when he was with Michigan and then watch him kick in San Francisco, there's just a different look on his face. Like, it's just different. And so I don't know if Jake Moody got in his head, but I'm hoping that he can sort it out. He's still a really talented kicker. The his strength is still there. He's proven in time and time again that he can kick in weather situations. He's got everything you want, but if he's not going to be able to figure it out with the mentals, as far as, not having the yips, then I think that they're going to have to move on. I think it's going to be interesting. I wonder who they bring in. It could just be a familiar name. Maybe they'll sign somebody that doesn't get drafted. But overall, I think that Jake Moody's going to have some competition on the 90-man roster. It'll be like his rookie season where Zane Gonzalez, who just had a big kick to help the Commanders win, was in camp. And that was a competition that Jake Moody ultimately won easily, actually. But it was, competition again's never bad for anybody.
Yeah. And the big question this year is going to this offseason is going to be, will the 49ers bring in anyone who might be able to push Brock Purdy a little bit? Now, they're not going to bring in somebody to compete with him, but might they bring in somebody that can help push him a little bit to make it, because he's the kind of guy who has a chip on his shoulder, and when he does, he's really good. And so I think that maybe we'll see something like that. But let's talk about Brock Purdy for a second. In January or February of 2018, the 49ers moved quickly to sign Jimmy Garoppolo, who was about to become a free agent. They signed him to a new deal after they had basically seen him play for the team for 5 games. Do you think the 49ers will re-up Brock Purdy in February, or do you think this thing could drag on?
I think they'd like to. I think they'd like to get this thing done before the new league year starts, because if they can, then that kind of maps out the rest of the offseason, what money they have to spend. If you can get those numbers locked down for Brock Purdy, you could start putting together what contracts would look like, for George Kittle and for Fred Warner, and then you can kind of push their money out a little bit, and then that gives you a real clear path on what you can spend during the offseason and free agency. So I think it's very important to get Brock Purdy's structure of his contract laid out. Even if it's not signed, I think they do want it signed, but even if they could come to an agreement on structure so they know what money they can get done. But I think Brock Purdy's willingness to not let this thing drag out, not let it be a distraction, but also just to be back for OTAs. It sounds like a player that's hungry to win football games and to prove the negativity wrong. So I think that you have two motivated sides to get this thing done. I can guarantee you right now, Parag already has some sort of structure that he sent that direction, and they know kind of where things are at. I think both sides want to get this thing done, and I think they can get it done, but at least the structure needs to be in place before the new league year starts and free agency starts.
Yeah, I agree. You can't let your quarterback be one of those that's not at practice. He needs to be there from day one. So Josh said extend him quickly. David is in the chat. He says, "What's up? Go Niners, go Irish! Can't wait until Monday." Yeah, I'm not a Notre Dame fan, but I live in the Chicago area, and so I'm about an hour from Notre Dame. Was there just like 2 nights ago, drove right past the campus. And so I usually, want them to win, so I'd like to see them beat Ohio State, but I don't like Ohio State. So that's part of that. But part of it is that I like, I'm okay with Notre Dame. Let's see. I'm going to get to David's other thing here in just a second. What's up, Papa J? Okay, so let's talk about coordinators, because we have essentially 3 coordinators that the 49ers are interviewing for. I don't really want to spend too much time on the offensive coordinator, because we know that Kubiak is going to be that person. Kyle wants him. He announced it, but then they found out that they can't just name him the coordinator, the offensive coordinator, that they actually had to go through a process. So I think very soon they'll officially name Kubiak as the offensive coordinator. Let's start with special teams coordinator. What do you we've heard some of the names. Who would you like to see? Is it anybody but Nick Sorensen, or are you okay with Sorensen, or is there somebody else that you prefer who's been named, or maybe somebody who hasn't been named yet?
Yeah, my guy through the whole process has been John Fossil. I didn't know if he was going to be available. I think Guy Haberman said that his contract was coming to an end. With that being said, and Mike McCarthy moving on, I think it should be official that John Fossil's out there. This is my favorite special teams coach in the entire league. I think he's consistently put out the best units. They're well detailed. They're usually towards the top of the league as far as efficiency and effectiveness from special teams. This is a guy that Kyle could get and put in place, and he doesn't have to worry about special teams. He doesn't have to worry if they're doing things right. The guy can completely handle every facet of the game. So I think John Fossil is my number one target for the 49ers. Now, I don't know if that means him and Kyle Shanahan would fit. I think that both of them have similar backgrounds, and their dads were both NFL coaches. So maybe they do have some common ground there. But Fossil's very aggressive when it comes to the style in which he goes about special teams, lots of fakes and lots of aggressiveness. I don't know if that's something Kyle is going to welcome. I would love that. So he's a name that I like the most. Now, we know that they just interviewed Chris Tabor, and that one is starting to make more sense. I think that one might be the more sensible choice for what Kyle Shanahan likes, because they have a stop together in Cleveland. Both of them were together in 2014 with the Cleveland Browns. So this is a guy that he knows. And we know that Kyle Shanahan likes to go with people he's already worked with. He has an understanding of how they operate. And so it kind of puts Tabor, I think, in the best situation to probably get this job. But ultimately, I hope it's Fossil. I really like Fossil a lot. And that would be the guy that I would target, because I think he's the best special teams coach in the NFL.
That's an interesting name. I had not thought about that, but yeah, I would like to see them be more aggressive on special teams, but like you said, that may not fit Kyle Shanahan. He's not overly aggressive. He's probably on the more conservative side than a lot of the ones that we might see. David said John Fossil would be awesome. He also said it's that golden helmet 49ers, Joe Montana, Notre Dame. Yeah, right here over my shoulder. That's Joe Montana's Notre Dame card. So I don't have it because I'm a Notre Dame fan. I have it because I'm a Joe Montana fan. So, but hey, if that makes David happy, that's all I care about. Let's see. I'm trying to see if anything else in here. Yeah, let's go to this comment from David that you starred here. This is back on the Brock Purdy thing. Lombardi says 61 million, 143 guaranteed. 61. No, I am not. I love Brock Purdy, huge Brock Purdy fan, but not at 61 million a year. I think he needs to be in the 50s. I'm not saying low 50s. But man, 61, dang, that seems high, doesn't it?
Yeah, I saw a projection. I can't remember. I wish I could remember exactly who it came from. PFF or one of them was 59 million, which would take him just under Dak Prescott as the highest paid, per year quarterback in the NFL. And I think that we're probably going to get somewhere in that range. I think you're right. I think 50 to 59 million seems like a sweet spot for Brock Purdy. And it all depends on what Brock Purdy's looking for. If Brock Purdy's looking to be the highest paid quarterback in the NFL, he's probably going to be able to get it, because you can't just find good quarterbacks around the league. But if he wants to leave a little bit of wiggle room for the team to continue to bring back players that are going to help the football team, then he might say, you know what, 55, 59 million, that's enough. Let's work this thing out. So it just depends on what both sides are looking at. But 60 million is crazy. But I think that's going to be the norm. I think that when we get 2 or 3 years from now, you're going to look at $60 million contracts for a quarterback, and you're going to be like, you know what? Those are affordable. Those are cheap. Because here pretty soon, guys who got paid 3-4 years ago, they're going to get new extensions. The guys like Josh Allen and Patrick Mahomes, their numbers are about to just be ridiculous. And that's why the NFL salary cap keeps going up, and all the new TV revenue keeps helping them do that. And I think we're a year away from even another explosion when it comes to salary cap. And then who knows what happens when they get to an 18-game schedule, more money, more TV money. It just all keeps going up, and the quarterbacks seem to be the biggest beneficiaries of it.
Yeah. Let's move on to defensive coordinator. Of the defensive coordinators that you have seen mentioned or not mentioned, I think most fans are hoping for Robert Saleh. Who knows? I mean, he has a couple of head coaching interviews. I saw that Jeff Ulbrich had a defensive coordinator interview today. What are they going to do at defensive coordinator? What are you hoping that they do? Do you want them to change the system? I see that David in the chat says, I want Dennis Allen. Do you like Dennis Allen? Is there somebody that you really like? Do you want to keep the system, change the system? What are you thinking there?
I do want to keep the system for the most part, because I believe that they've drafted personnel that fit that system. I don't want to see wholesale changes. This isn't a time to be like, oh, let's go to the 3-4. Adjusting from the wide 9, I wouldn't be opposed to that. But they also have the talent to play that. So it just depends. I think what we want to get is a defensive coordinator, like Kyle Shanahan said, that understands what adjustments you have to make when teams throw things at you that you're not prepared for. And I think that's what happened to Nick Sorensen. He wasn't prepared. He wasn't ready to be able to make these adjustments on the fly. And certain coaches can't. They can only coach what they already know or what they're prepared for. They can't find a way around making things happen. And so I think that Robert Saleh is probably the prospect as far as defensive coordinator that makes the most sense for 49er fans, because he's somebody that's already done it. And when you listen to the way that Kyle Shanahan described the guy, it was a guy that's been through a building process before. Well, nobody has been through a building process like Robert Saleh with Kyle Shanahan. So they understand exactly what it takes to take a team to the Super Bowl and build a defense from the ground up. He also knows how to make adjustments, and he can adjust on the fly. All you have to do is look at 2019 defense to 2020, which was marred by injury, but they still got it done. Kerry Hyder led the team in sacks. They were still a top 10 defense. So he's proven it. Now, I do like some of the other options. I never thought Robert Saleh was a real option until he interviewed. Then I had to believe it. But you're right. He's up for 3 head coaching jobs, and there's a chance that Trent Baalke could screw the 49ers over one more time and sign Robert Saleh to be the head coach. But I think there's a lot of good options. I like Lou Anarumo, the Cincinnati Bengals former defensive coordinator. I like him. The way he makes adjustments, the way he's been able to do it with all kinds of different talent, I think he's interesting. I think Dennis Allen, like David said in chat, is a good one. Davis Allen, he's been doing a really good job, Dennis Allen, over the years, making adjustments. I think he's a lot like Steve Spagnuolo, where he's made to be a really good defensive coordinator. He's just not a CEO. He's not a head coach, and that's okay. But that could be a good situation. The way Andy Reid got Spagnuolo to be his guy that's just with him for a long time, maybe that could happen with Dennis Allen, where Shanahan's able to get him in, and then he just sticks with Shanahan for 5 to 10 years because no one really is looking for him as a head coach again because he's already had 2 opportunities. It could be a longevity situation that's good. So I think the preferred pick originally is going to be Robert Saleh, and I think that's the smoothest, that's the best. But I don't know what's going to happen with the head coaching situation. After that, I think Anarumo and Dennis Allen make a lot of sense as veterans who know, who've seen, and are able to adjust on the fly.
Do you need a defensive coordinator that's fiery like Saleh and like DeMeco Ryans? I mean, you have Vic Fangio, who A, was in the booth, and B, is not as fiery as those guys. You have guys like Bill Walsh, who was the professor, so he wasn't fiery, although I'm sure he was at times animated. But we look at Steve Wilks, we look at Nick Sorensen, they're far from fiery. Does this group, I know that we don't need you can get by without a defensive coordinator that's fiery. If they're good at schematics, if they're good at adjustments, if they teach well, then they can succeed. But this group, led by Fred Warner, Nick Bosa, those guys, do you think they need somebody more fiery that can kick them into gear and just because yeah, and again, I don't want to say anything bad about Steve Wilkes because he did a good job last year. It just wasn't the same as it had been. But what do you think? Is that just way overrated?
I think that, sometimes it can be. I think that there are certain situations where certain teams need that energy. I think that Fred Warner and Nick Bosa, they were used to Robert Sala's energy and that fire energy. And then there were moments that D'Amico Ryans would display the same sort of thing because he felt the emotion of playing the game. And so I think they were used to a certain type of personality when it came to defensive coordinator. I think when you look at the way that teams are built, a lot of times you will find balance where you'll find one guy that's fully energetic, and it's usually the defensive coordinator because the offensive coordinator has to be very cool, calm, and collected. So you talked about Bill Walsh being the guy that was the professor, and really it wasn't George Seifert that was the fiery guy, but it was Ray Rhodes who was the fiery guy. And so you have to have those guys sometimes. You look at the Philadelphia Eagles, you look at what's going on with Vic Fangio. He's not a fiery guy, but Nick Sirianni's fired enough for everybody. So you don't need somebody like that. He's the guy that's always flying around and having to be pulled back. So I think there is something to that. I don't know if this team has to have it. I would like to say that they don't, that Fred Warner and Dre Greenlaw and Nick Bosa and those guys could get up for games and could get each other fired up. But it is something that was ingrained in them. So maybe they are used to it. That's part of the reason I keep coming back to Robert Saleh is because he would just fit right back in. I mean, he would step in day one and say, all gas, no brakes, and everyone would be like, "Hip, let's go. We're running it back." And I think that's an energy that he brings, and it does balance kind of Shanahan's demeanor on the sideline. So it does make sense, but I don't think it has to be one of those guys.
Yeah, and you're right. When Fangio was with the 49ers, he didn't have to be fiery because Jim Harbaugh was. And so, yeah, that's interesting to think about. Well, let's do a little bit of talking through some of the free agents that are some of the players on the 49ers that are scheduled to be free agents once March comes around. And what I want to ask is, let's talk about if the 49ers are going to bring them back. I mean, we all have our opinions, but let's discuss if they're going to bring them back or if they're going to let them go. Let's start with left guard Aaron Banks.
I think they're going to let him go. I don't think Aaron Banks has done enough to make you think you need to bring him back. And I thought, and I kind of said this during the week, I think that Ben Barch actually outplayed Aaron Banks, and we got the best snaps at guard from Ben Barch. So to me, I'm looking at this as I could save money, bring back Ben Barch, and potentially have a better player. I think that it's unfortunate, but Aaron Banks, he was good while he was here, but I think he's starting to kind of fall apart physically, and I think it's time for the 49ers to move in a different direction.
Yeah, I would agree. Josh in the chat agrees. Jason Massey seems to agree. He says that Barch and Zakel were better. So, yeah, I think that we're on the same page there. Jordan Mason is a restricted free agent. So if the 49ers want him back, they can make sure that happens. But they also could tender him at a 4th-round pick or something like that. And then if a team signs him, then they get that back in return. Will they do something like that, or will they bring Jordan Mason back?
I think if you put a tender on Jordan Mason, it's probably going to be like a 2nd-round tender. You don't want to do an original tender. That'll be like basically a right of first refusal, and you probably won't match what anyone is able to pay him. So it's a tough thing. If you put that 2nd-round tender on him, you got to pay him close to $5 million. That might be a little bit too rich for what should be a backup running back. I could see the 49ers potentially doing it, but I think Jordan Mason might get traded. I think this is an opportunity for the 49ers to maybe add some draft capital, move on from Jordan Mason and go a different route. Not so much because of the player. Love the player. Love what he can do within this offense. But when you look at it financially, does it make sense to have, 25 plus $1 million locked into the running back room? I'm not sure it does. So that could be one of those cuts. And you go ahead and trade him so that way you make sure you get draft capital back for him and don't, miss on an opportunity to get something for Jordan Mason. But you could also see him come back. I just think he might be a trade candidate.
Jason Massey says, bring Mason back. David said, I love Mason, but he's replaceable. $5 million's too much. Jason also says, can't count on CMC health. So I think he's going to be back. And I think he's going to be back because of Christian McCaffrey. I don't know what to expect from him physically, and I think that he'll be okay, but I would expect Jordan Mason to be back. Charvarius Ward.
No, I don't think so. I think that when they signed De'Amara Lenore, that was the sign financially. They weren't going to bring back Charvarius Ward, just with the contract that Demo got. And then I thought the statements after the season from Charvarius Ward, I thought they were, definitely eye-opening because, you don't know what's going on in someone's mental when they have some sort of a loss the way that he did. And the fact that he brought up about him and his wife and some of the personal things that they're dealing with, to me, it makes sense for him to find a fresh location. And the 49ers, business-wise, I think we're ready to move on. Love the guy. I think Charvarius Ward's one of the greats. As far as a person, he's really good. He's a good football player. But I think he's going to find a new location around the league. And I think the 49ers will wish him the best.
I agree. Now to the guy that I really, 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 did I mention really, hope is back, and that's Dre Greenlaw.
I think Dre's going to come back. I think they're going to figure this thing out. I think when you're looking at needs for the 49ers, one of those would be linebacker. Number 59, I refuse to say his name at this point. Number 59 did such a terrible job down the stretch, and then he just quit on his football team. You've got to have a linebacker that can get it done if you're going to run this defense. And Dre Greenlaw brings that energy. He brings the intensity. And that Rams game alone let everyone know what this defense looks like when Dre Greenlaw lined up next to Fred Warner. He's a difference maker. So they're going to find a way to get Dre Greenlaw back because, like Kyle Shanahan said, we're not in the business of letting go of great football players and great people. And Dre Greenlaw is a great person and a really good football player.
Yeah, the defense is different when he's on the field. You saw it in the Super Bowl. You saw it in that Rams game. Josh said, I think Dre leaves personally. Dang you, Josh. If he leaves, I'm blaming you. I'm coming on here and blaming you, man. David says, who is number 59? We don't say his name. So
yeah,
you'll just have to look that up. Along the same lines, Talanoa Hufanga missed much of the season, came back, played well, but I don't know. I'd like to see him back, but do you think they will bring him back?
I think they're going to let him look at his market. I think they have a number that they're looking at. I think his health issues could actually make a market for him to be able to return. And so I think when you're looking at the safety room right now, the 49ers need a veteran safety that could play next to Malik Mustafa. Jair Brown was not consistent this year. He struggled tackling. It was a big problem. They can't go into the season with Jair Brown and Malik Mustafa as the safeties, and it has nothing to do with Malik. I don't say give up on Jair, but they need to make sure they have a guy there. I think that the first choice would be Talanoa Hufanga as they try to draft another replacement as they attack that as well. But there could be other free agents along the way that they look at. But if Hufanga's market's not big, he could come back to the 49ers for a very modest number. This might end up being a lot like when Dre Greenlaw got his second contract, where it was well under what everyone thought he was going to get. Maybe that's what happens with Hufanga, and then the 49ers feel really good about having Hufanga back.
How about John Feliciano? He missed the entire season with an injury, but some believe that he ought to be, or that he would have been the starting center if he was healthy.
Feliciano's still a really good football player. The problem is he just wasn't healthy. I think Feliciano might actually take this out of the 49ers' hands. I have a feeling he might retire. I think that him not being able to come back off of IR, that knee just never getting right, I wonder if it ever is going to get right. And so if he could get right, I'm sure, because I mean they brought him back, they liked him. He could definitely compete with Jake Brendel. But I think if he's not, then you're gonna have a guy who possibly retires. So it's retirement or come back. I think the 49ers would bring him back. He could compete for left guard with Ben Barch. But I'm just not sure he's going to continue playing.
Yeah, and that's what Jason Massey says in the chat. Does Feliciano even want to play? He said this was his last season. That could be. I didn't hear him say that, but if he said that, then I would tend to agree. How about the backup quarterbacks? Joshua Dobbs, Brandon Allen, both are scheduled to be free agents. Will either of them be back, or will the 49ers shift gears and go in a different direction for the backup?
Well, you brought up something interesting earlier where you talked about Brock Purdy and competition. And one thing that we've not considered is in 2022, he just had to compete to even make that roster. So he was doing everything he could. Then he goes out there and gets his opportunity, and it was just, guns blazing the whole time. Then he comes back from the injury in 2023, and the competition is there. Trey Lance is competing for that starting job, and everyone's wondering, is it going to be Trey Lance? And there was all the conversation about Tom Brady coming and taking his spot behind the scenes. Maybe he needs that. This is the first season he came in, and Josh Dobbs and Brandon Allen were no threat to him at all. And I'm not saying you're going to find somebody that's a threat to him starting, but maybe someone with a little bit of an attitude, somebody that could come in that already thinks he's a really good quarterback, somebody that was a top pick that says, hey, you know what? I could be like Sam Darnold if I get my opportunity. And so I think that Brandon Allen's gone. I think they're going to go ahead and move on from him. I think there's an off chance that they could bring back Dobbs, because I think Dobbs' mobility and some of the things he did definitely leans into what Kyle likes, being able to create when things break down. So maybe that's a possibility. But a name to keep an eye on, and I know everyone's heard this already, but I've been saying it for a while, Zach Wilson. I think he could be a possibility, a high-round draft pick who could come to revitalize his career. He's only 25 years old, and if there's anyone confident in their own abilities, it's Zach Wilson. Maybe that'll be the push Brock Purdy needs, and maybe Brock Purdy could be what Zach Wilson needs to become a good pro.
How about Isaac Yedem?
I think that of the couple of guys that are going to be free agents in the secondary, Isaac Yedem would be someone they're interested in. But I do think Isaac Yedem's going to move on. I think that they're going to go a couple of different routes. I've just started looking at some of the free agent cornerbacks, and I think there could be a couple of guys that maybe they want to bring in. I think they'll continue to draft people, but they might just have a guy like Nick McLeod on their team already that has some versatility that could allow you to leave Deommodore Lenoir on the outside sometimes. So I think Yedem's in the mix, but if I had to guess, I would think he's probably not coming back.
I'd love to see them upgrade to where that nickel spot is better than it was this past year. I mean, it was great when Lenoir played it, and when they had Ward and Green on the outsides, but when Ward was out or what have you, and somebody like Yedem had to come in and play, it just wasn't the same. So I'd like to see that improve. How about Jalen Moore?
I think they want to bring back Jalen Moore. I think that Chris Foerster has invested in Jalen Moore, and I think they finally got him this year to where he was a consistent player, enough so that the first part, when Trent Williams was out, you weren't getting the big time blocks, but you weren't getting was problems. You almost forgot Jalen Moore was playing, which is exactly what you want. You don't want to hear about it when you're an offensive lineman. So I thought he did a really good job. I think as long as the money doesn't get out of control or someone doesn't give him an opportunity to be a starting right tackle somewhere, I think you do bring him back. I think he could be your swing tackle because I think he did a really good job. And I think Chris Foerster knows what you're going to get out of Jalen Moore. They like him.
Yeah, he played much better than I expected him to play. Here's a good one. Before the season, I would have said Elijah Mitchell will not be back in 2025. Now I'm not as sure. I still think that he's probably gone. What do you think?
I think there's a chance he comes back because what is his interest going to be around the league? I just don't think anyone's going to be really interested in Elijah Mitchell for much more than a rotational running back position. No one's going to give him an opportunity to start with all the injuries that are going on. So if he's going to be a vet minimum guy, why not come back to San Francisco? They will plug you right in, especially if you have to make a move with Jordan Mason. They'll put you right back up there with Isaac Guerrero as that running back 2 type position. Kyle trusts him a lot. So I think there's a chance he comes back. I think financially, this is not a risk. And I think you pay him a vet minimum and you see what happens, but he's somebody that and I know at some point people are going to get tired of the injuries, and that's true. But everything that they say about him is always so glowing. So I think it's a possibility that he comes back. Maybe, he decides that there's another opportunity for him around the league, but I just don't think anyone's going to pay him.
The last ones I want to ask about are a couple of guys that came out of nowhere. Evan Anderson and Sam Okawanu. Are either of these guys back?
Yeah, they're both ERFAs, so they'll be back. The thing is, as long as they're tendered a contract as exclusive rights free agents, they'll be back, and I think both of them are. I think that John Lynch brought up Evan Anderson, talking about the type of production that they got from him as a undrafted free agent. I think they like it. I think there's a lot of development that needs to happen there for him to be a consistent 3-down player for sure. But even a run stopper, I think there's a lot of things he could do to get better with his hands and get a little bit better with his get off. But I do think he's back. And I think when it comes to Sam Okawanu, he did really good at the beginning of the year. I think at some point he hit a little bit of a wall. I wonder if that was conditioning or whatever it was. But I think there's a lot to like there, and I'd like to see both of those guys come in and compete. And the 49ers have a lot of decisions to make when it comes to defensive line. They need to restructure it. And I think those guys are going to have opportunities to get in there and push some guys. And with Drake Jackson potentially coming back, Robert Beal Jr., Sam Okawanu, there's a lot of hope for the defensive end. So I do think both those guys will be tendered and be back.
I want to go to the starred question from the 49ers 2025. Do you see the 49ers hiring someone from college? I would assume that he's talking about from earlier when we were talking about the coordinators.
I think if the right candidate was there, I do think that they would consider it. Just look at what Green Bay did hiring Jeff Hafley. That's a guy that had been with the 49ers organization and coached with Kyle Shanahan. If there was a guy like that in college football that Kyle felt comfortable with and had a lot of respect for, and they came in with some good ideas about what they were going to do personnel-wise and with scheme, then yeah, he would definitely consider it. I think for the most part, those guys don't come around very often, especially when it comes to Kyle. We haven't seen him get too many guys from college that aren't coming in to kind of work their way up. He likes to get those guys and then have them come in as assistant position coaches or, some other roles and then work them in. So I think it would, but I don't know if there's a Jeff Hafley out there that the 49ers would be interested in. So I'm leaning towards no, but he would consider it if it was the right guy.
Well, David in the chat says, I love Al Golden for defensive coordinator. But you expect the Notre Dame fan to want the Notre Dame guy. So,
yeah.
But then he also mentioned that he was Cincinnati's defensive coordinator when they made it to the Super Bowl. So that would be a guy with NFL experience. I still think I think that Shanahan is going to stick with those in the NFL. I think he's going to, like you mentioned this earlier, I think he's going to stick with the scheme. I just think that that's what he's comfortable with, and that's why Saleh makes the most sense. Last thing, there are multiple injured players that we'll have to see what they look like in 2025. Dre Greenlaw being one of those, but I want to hit on 3 of them and see what you think we might expect to see from them in 2025. One is Brandon Ayuk coming back from a pretty serious knee injury. One is Christian McCaffrey coming back from multiple injuries. And the other is Trent Williams, who, by all accounts, had a pretty messed up ankle throughout the season. And he's been dealing with that a lot over the years. What do you think with these 3 guys? Because these are 3 of the offense's best players. Do you think, let's start with Ayuk. Big knee injury. These days, players can come back better, from knee injuries, but can he come back in 2025 and be even close to the player he was in 2023?
I mean, just my first thoughts would have to be no. I mean, I didn't even see him in 2024 being the player he was in 2023 because he didn't have training camp, let alone coming off a major knee injury. I don't know when Brandon Ayuk is going to be ready. I know they said he's on target. We've heard the reports that he was playing basketball in the locker room and doing some jump shots, and that's all good news that he's mobile. But there's a lot of things you have to do before you can go out there and cut and make the change of directions that he's going to have to make to get open. So I don't know when Ayuk is going to come back, but I do think it's going to derail his production in 2025. I think that's part of the reason that Kyle Shanahan and John Lynch are so dead set on Deebo Samuel is going to be a part of this team in 2025 because they're going to need Jawan Jennings and Ricky Pearsall and Deebo Samuel to have production at the wide receiver position. I think they could also bring in somebody else, maybe through the draft or somebody in free agency that can help that along the way. They might need an X receiver, a pure X receiver for the first part of the season, especially. So it could be something they addressed a lot of the way that they did with number 59 when Drake Greenlaw was going to be out. We have to bring in a guy that's going to get some things done. So I think it could be that. But yeah, I just can't see Ayuk having that sort of impact. I wish he could. I wish he could come right back, step right in. But I just don't think so. I think it's unrealistic to believe so.
Yeah. And by the way, Ricky Pearsall was impressive over those last few games. I hadn't checked out on him, but I was like, gosh, is his rookie season being kind of stunted by everything that's happened to him from the injury to the shooting? And but man, he really balled out down the stretch.
Yeah, he did. And this is kind of what I know it was very limited what I got to see of him in training camp, but the way he carried himself, the way he operated in the offense, the way he got open, it was just something different than the other rookie wide receivers that I had seen with the 49ers over the last 4 or 5 years. And that was what was so impressive is this guy carries himself like a 5-year veteran. And I think that's what we started seeing down the stretch. When he started finally getting his legs underneath him is when he started making all those plays. And I think sky's the limit for him. And I think what's crazy is he's even more impressive as a person than a football player. And I think that's going to carry him a long way. So I love Ricky Pearsall. And I think 49er fans are going to be very excited about him over the next couple of years.
What about Christian McCaffrey? We all saw in the Buffalo game where he looked like himself. It looked like McCaffrey was finally back, and then he went down on that one play where he wasn't even touched. And I think that all 49ers fans across the world had their heart sink. Turned out it wasn't as bad as what we thought in that moment, but expect him to come back and be the same McCaffrey that he was. Maybe not 2023 version, but hopefully, the 2022 version and before.
Yeah, I think that's the realistic way to look at it. Is we're probably never going to see 2023 Christian McCaffrey again. That was just an amazing season, and he was tremendous. And I think he's going to have to change the way that he works out, and I think they're going to have a really good plan to help him monitor and handle his Achilles tendonitis. And I think that's one thing I'm hoping will be in the rearview mirror. And I think they're gonna figure out a way for him to do that. And I think part of the reason we saw a 2024 version that wasn't even close was because number one, he was dealing with the tendonitis, but number two, the only thing that they could do is rest. He wasn't getting the same sort of work. This wasn't the same condition Christian McCaffrey that we saw. Now with a full offseason, we're going to get closer to who that Christian McCaffrey is while also keeping those Achilles in check. So I think he'll come back. I think he'll play really well. He'll still be an elite player for the 49ers. I just don't know if we'll get 2023 elite, but I think he'll like you said, 2022, the non-injury years for him, I think he'll do a really good job and he'll make an impact for this football team.
Last one is Trent Williams. I think the last time we talked, because it has been a while. I think because we had Christmas and all of that, and I was sick last week, and I don't remember what else went on. But last time we talked, I was wondering, could he potentially retire? Well, he answered that. It doesn't sound like he's going to. You think he gets that ankle figured out and can come back. He's getting up there in the years. He's starting to miss more and more games, mostly because of that ankle. What do you think we'll see from Trent Williams in 2025?
Yeah, I think the trend will be back. Just listening to what the injury was, the bruise in that ankle joint like that, that's something that's difficult to come back from for anyone. But when you're 30, 5+ years old, as Trent Williams is, it gets a little bit harder and a little bit harder. So there's some little things that he might to adjust to. Maybe he adjusts his cleats. I know he likes his flexibility and he likes to be able to move quickly. That's one of his tremendous assets. But maybe because of the ankle injuries, it's time to go to a more of a high top type cleat, the way Christian McCaffrey did this season. There's some subtle adjustments like that. But the one thing I know about Trent Williams is you never count the guy out. And this guy wants to prove that he's one of the greatest, if not the greatest left tackle of all time. And he has some records he still wants to accomplish. He has a Super Bowl win that he wants to get. And I think he still thinks he can do it in San Francisco. So I think he'll be back. I think he'll be great. I think he'll be better than 2024 because he'll have a full offseason and a training camp where he can kind of work his way in. He'll still take his days off and all that. But I think that really did hinder him, the holdout this season. I think him and Brandon Ayuk suffered, and I think the 49ers in general suffered because of it. So, yeah, it'll be back to see him getting back out there and making the plays that only Trent Williams can make.
Great stuff as always, Ant. That is our time today. Thanks, everybody, for joining us. We will be back next week for a new episode of the Red and Bold Show. Make sure you like and subscribe wherever you're watching. We appreciate your support. You can find us at 49ers Cutback and 49ers Camelot. We'd love to have you join us. And thanks, as always, not only for everybody in the chat, but for everybody watching today or whenever you happen to be watching. Have a great rest of your week, everybody.